Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 5 of the fantasy football season. We'll go through all 28 teams playing this week, 14 matchups in total. You can pause your screen and go to a specific matchup if you want. The time codes are also down below, so we've got you no matter what you're looking at this week. Now, there are some major players you're going to be missing this week, not because of injuries, but because of buys. We've got the Falcons, Bears, Packers, and Steelers on bye, which means there will be no Drake London, no Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, no Romeo Doubs or Matthew Golden, and no DK Metcalf. But don't worry, in today's video, we're going to cover it all. You'll have my rankings for every single wide receiver, and you're going to set your lineup together with me. Now, here's something you need to know. I am guaranteeing a reply for the first 3 comments of every video this year, so make sure you're subscribed and you turn your notifications on so you don't miss out on that opportunity. Okay, let's go to Thursday Night Football. We've got the 49ers at the Rams. It's a 46.5 point over under. The Rams are favored by 3.5 points. And I think that line is probably going to move closer and closer to the Rams, like in favor of them. It's going to be more drastic because there are so many injuries that the 49ers are dealing with. You know, not even just on the offensive side of the ball, but for example, Brock Purdy, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, all DNPs in practice on Monday. We'll have to monitor their participation throughout the next couple of days. Obviously, it's a short week, so it's not a good sign that all these guys are dealing with injuries. Now, technically, the Monday injury on a Thursday Night Football is an estimation, so just keep that in mind. But shout out to Jeff Mueller, who got a little bit more insight on Ricky Pearsall's injury. He said he suffered a right PCL sprain with risk of costing him some play time. The downside is the 49ers play on Thursday night, 4 days from now, which is, you would have seen this yesterday, right? So there's a very good chance that Ricky Pearsall is not available. There's a very good chance that Juwan Jennings is not available. And here's how I want to play this out. So we've covered all of our bases this year. Okay, so in the world where Ricky, Juwan are available, then we're going to label Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings as spot starts. They are flexible names. If you look last week with a healthy Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, there were 5 targets for Ricky, 4 to Bourne, 4 to Juwan Jennings. So Marcus Robinson got involved. Really, outside of Christian McCaffrey, it was kind of spread out pretty evenly, right? So we can't tell you to start them with the utmost confidence. However, if they're out there, think about the game script. The Rams are a great offense. They're going to be able to score. You're going to have to rely on your receivers late in the game for 49ers. So again, if they're out there, I do think you can play Pearsall and Jennings, but my anticipation is they probably don't play. Now, if Pearsall and Jennings are out, then DeMarcus Robinson and Kendra Bourne, those are the names that will quote unquote step up, if you will. Now, I don't think I have any confidence to tell you to start either of these names. Technically, Bourne had a higher target share than DeMarcus Robinson in week number 4. But if I had to choose one name, it's probably DeMarcus Robinson because he's been with this team for longer. He was just suspended. But all these guys are risky starts. I mean, you're really throwing up a Hail Mary if you're trusting them on Thursday Night Football, even though anything can happen. On the opposite side of the ball, things are much more simple, okay? You start Puka Nacua. Hey, who out there has Puka Nacua like me in the Flock League? Oh my God, he saved my ass with the 36-point game. Shout out to you, Puka. And then Devontae Adams, my guy for us in 2025. You play these guys, both top 10 wide receivers in my rankings. I know anything can happen, but I can't imagine you sitting these guys in week number 5. Okay, we've got a London game here. Vikings at Browns. Now, here's the funny part about this. Minnesota just played in Dublin, and they're actually staying across the pond, and they're just going to do a little holidaying this week, right? So they go from Dublin to London. It's Vikings at Browns, lowest over-under of the week. Not a great sign for fantasy football purposes. The Vikings are favored by 3.5 points. Now, here's how I would break this down. The good news for Justin Jefferson is finally, we got to see him in a role where he is heavily featured. He had 11 targets in that game in Dublin. 11 targets turned into 126 yards, 10 receptions, 22.6 fantasy points. Now, Jordan Addison also was very good. He had a huge catch, and he should have scored a touchdown, obviously, but that's his threat. He's always kind of like a Jameson Williams equivalent for the Vikings offense. 114 receiving yards. Now, here's the deal. I don't really care who's at quarterback, whether it's J.J. McCarthy or Carson Wentz. I think they're both fine options. Regardless, I am starting Justin Jefferson, okay? He's going into my lineups. Now, Jordan Addison is the one that's a little bit more difficult, simply because the Browns defense is not that bad. And specifically thinking about home run plays deep down the field where you want to see Jordan Addison thrive, they're really good at stopping those. I mean, Jamison Williams last week, him and Goff weren't on the same page, but 8 targets, he was only able to catch 2 of them. So Jordan Addison might not have a very efficient day, but he's a flexible name, my wide receiver 29 this week. All I would say is if you're in a 12 or a 14 team league, you're probably starting him with all the buys and the injuries. But if you're in an 8 or a 10 team league, you might have a better option. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, it's an absolute shit show. I would not, with any confidence, tell you to start any of these names. Number one, the Vikings defense is the worst matchup for your fantasy wide receivers this year. They rank dead last in points allowed to the position. Number two, first off, I mean, Jerry Jeudy, there hasn't been a single game where he's been great. The problem with the Browns is last year they were really hyper targeting Njoku and Jeudy. This year they're spreading the ball out. They're getting the ball to Judkins in the backfield. They're getting the ball to Harold Fannin, to David Njoku, to Tillman, to Jeudy, to their wide receivers 3 and 4, right? Now, obviously, Cedric Tillman won't play in this game because he has a hamstring injury, so he's not going to play out there. And then you also have to ask the question, well, is Joe Flacco, how long is he going to be the starter? At the time of recording this video, he's still technically the starter, but I will be shocked if we don't see a change, if not this week, next week. Dylan Gabriel's got to get a shot at some point. You're not a team that's going to make the playoffs. There's no reason to keep playing Joe Flacco. Stefanski said, look, I understand why you guys are asking this question. We have to play better and we have to coach better. That's not about one person. My focus is on making sure this offense plays better. However, Stefanski, Joe Flacco has 8 turnovers in 4 games. Okay? 8 turnovers in 4 games. Something has to change. Unfortunately, I don't care if it's Joe Flacco. I don't care if Tom Brady unretires and comes back to the Browns. I'm not playing any receiver, okay? You can play Jeudy if you have no other option and hope for garbage time, but it's disgusting. I don't want to be a part of it. The third matchup we're going to look at here is the Texans at the Ravens. This is the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. It's a 44.5 point over-under. Now, the Ravens are heavy favorites, 7-point favorites right now, but I would anticipate that line getting closer and closer to Houston because I don't believe we're going to see Lamar Jackson out there this week. Now, there was a question asked to John Harbaugh after the game about Lamar Jackson's hamstring injury. They basically were like, hey, did Lamar not go back in because it was a blowout or is he really injured? And Harbaugh replied and basically said, hey, look, there was no way he could have gone back into that game. Like, it didn't matter if it was a close game. He wouldn't have gone back in. So that tells me that this is a serious injury. And more likely than not, Lamar's not going to be out there. Now, I still think Zay Flowers is a must start simply because when we saw Lamar Jackson go out, we did see the backup Cooper Rush heavily target Zay Flowers. So with all the buys, with all the injuries this week, I just don't see you sitting Zay Flowers. And I do think it's going to be a very competitive game. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Nico Collins is a smash start this week. The Ravens are a top 5 matchup for your wide receiver. I know last week Nico Collins wasn't great, but you have to keep in mind they didn't need to throw the ball at all during that entire game. And better news for Nico Collins, the best cornerback that the Ravens have, Marlon Humphrey, is going to be out multiple weeks. So he will not be present during this game. That is incredible news for Nico Collins. I don't trust anyone else in this offense to tell you to start them with confidence, but we'll see how the Higgins role grows over the course of the next couple weeks. Okay, at number 4, Dolphins at Panthers. 44.5 point over under. I think that number is going to come down with the Tyreek injury. The Dolphins are favored. We could see that change even with it being in Carolina in the next couple of days. It probably goes to a favorite with the Panthers, but it's going to be a close spread no matter what. Look, if you have Tyreek Hill, I'm so sorry. I mean, he was starting to look really great. Him and Tua looked like they were on the same page. He was on track to have an incredible game. You never want to see this stuff. A disgusting injury. If you haven't seen it yet, don't go watch it. Trust me. It was not fun to look at. Just know that without a doubt, he is out for the entire season. This is the type of injury that might affect his entire career, honestly. Ian Rappaport said a dislocated kneecap oftentimes comes with multiple ligament tears. They had to rush him to the hospital. It was just a bad situation. This will not only impact his season, but maybe his career and maybe his future health, right? So, hey, let's give a moment of silence for Tyreek Hill's season. However, we have to talk about fantasy football, okay? We don't want to be insensitive. However, with Tyreek Hill going out for the year, Jalen Waddle gets a huge bump, not only in rest of season rankings, but also in week number 5. He faces the Panthers. It's a tough matchup, but he will be the unquestioned number 1 weapon for the Miami Dolphins. So you can go out there and you can play him with a ton of confidence here in week number 5. Here's the good news. In week Number 4, he led all wide receivers in targets with 5. But again, you have to remember they didn't need to throw the ball. So this should be a much more competitive game, and Waddle's in play. You can put him in your lineup. On the opposite side of the ball, I know it sounds crazy to have Tetairoa McMillan as the wide receiver 13, but he's heavily being targeted. He's one of the most targeted wide receivers in the NFL, and we are just like every week so close to a big game. So I don't want to give up on him, especially against a Miami Dolphins secondary that has a huge gaping hole after all the players that they let go during the offseason. So I do think T-Mac, you're going to start with a ton of confidence. It's just, he's going to give you a safe floor. We're just waiting for that breakout game. Okay, at number 5, fifth matchup of the week, Raiders at Colts, 48.5 point over under. So a high over under, which is what we want to see. However, the Colts are heavy favorites at 6.5 points. So obviously Vegas is telling us, hey, we're probably going to see a pretty big game for the Indianapolis Colts, and maybe don't bet on the receivers from Las Vegas, right? Unfortunately for Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker, neither of them have been hyper targeted in the last couple of games. I mean, Trey Tucker got the 9 targets in one of those games, but Jacoby Myers, he had a great position last week versus the Bears where he should have smashed and he didn't. So it's hard to tell you in matchups moving forward that you should start him with a ton of confidence. I mean, I do think he's a flexible name, but he's not being heavily targeted anymore. They're spreading the ball out evenly throughout this entire offense, kind of the Pete Carroll way, if you will. And unfortunately for Trey Tucker, he came back down to earth. Even more negative news, Colton Miller, one of the best tackles for the Raiders, is going to miss a lot of time with a high ankle sprain. So that's going to affect the ability for Geno Smith to sit back in that pocket, read the field, and throw the ball down the field. So I'd be very cautious starting Trey Tucker, even though it's a good matchup. And Jacoby Myers is a play. He's a flexible name at best, simply because of the amount of injuries and buys that we have this week. On the opposite side of the ball, we are going to tell you to start Michael Pittman with the utmost confidence. I mean, clearly through the first 4 weeks, we're seeing a lot of trends. Certain things aren't sticky, certain things are. One of the most sticky trends through the first 4 weeks is that Michael Pittman is that dude again for the Colts. Okay, 10 targets in week number 4, 10 targets, led the way, clearly the number 1 wide receiver for this team. Caught 5 of those targets for 41 yards and a touchdown. You know, the touchdown really saved his day, but he is the number 1 weapon for Daniel Jones. It's not even close. It's a great matchup versus the Raiders, the 3rd best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. So put him out there with a ton of confidence. Josh Downs is a Hail Mary play. He's just not stretching the field. He's basically Wan'Dale Robinson, but what Wan'Dale used to be with Daniel Jones. It's not pretty right now. Okay, let's go to the Giants at the Saints. Now, this is a 41.5 point over under, so not a lot of points expected in this matchup. The Giants are favored, even though it's in New Orleans. And we have to talk about Malik Nabers. Obviously, moment of silence for Malik Nabers. The nature of fantasy football, the nature of the NFL, injuries happen. That's unfortunate, right? He's going to be out for the entire year. I'm so sorry if you drafted him. I'm sorry to Malik Nabers. However, for fantasy football purposes, this obviously gives Wan'Dale Robinson a huge bump. In fact, he goes up to my wide receiver 28 this week, a flexible name that's wide receiver 2-3 range, right? Spot start, if you will. Ryan Heath over on Twitter noted that basically from the time that Malik Nabers went down, Wan'Dale Robinson was tied for first in target share with 30.8% of the targets. Now, if you go back and you actually look at that Giants game, you're like, okay, he had 31% of the targets. Why did he only have 5 targets then? Well, he had 5 targets because he only threw the ball 20 times because they were up for the entirety of the game versus the Chargers. Nobody saw that coming, right? So here, this should be a much more competitive game. The Saints are not, they're a bad team, but they were competitive versus the Bills. I think they're going to be competitive versus the Giants. So Wan'Dale is a really safe floor play this week. Darius Slayton, the other guy that will get some work because of the Malik Nabers injury, but he's much more of a Hail Mary play than anybody that you're taking seriously. And on the opposite side of the ball, Chris Olave is one of my favorite starts this week. Chris Olave always getting a heavy percentage of the target share in New Orleans. Spencer Rattler has been very intentional about getting him the ball, averaging over 10 targets per game. And the best news is the Giants are the 2nd best matchup for your wide receiver, so we should see a huge day for Chris Olave. Didn't mean to make that rhyme. I'm not Dr. Seuss. Okay, let's move on to the Cowboys at the Jets. How about George Pickens, man? What an awesome performance from George Pickens on Sunday Night Football. You loved it if you had him on your team. You hated it if you played against him. A top 10 wide receiver for me here in week number 5. Obviously, with no CeeDee Lamb, he was always going to get more volume. Jalen Tolbert, by the way, a risky start, but he would be the other wide receiver if you're going to entertain someone. If you're in a tough spot, Tolbert would be the name to entertain, but I wouldn't really prefer to trust any of these guys. By the way, CeeDee Lamb is quote unquote trending in the right direction. That doesn't mean he's going to play this week. In fact, I would bet most of the money in my bank account that he doesn't play this week. You can come back and tell me I'm wrong if I am, but don't anticipate CeeDee Lamb being out there. That's the way I'm ranking it, at least. On the opposite side of the ball, you're going to start Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson was so close to a 2-touchdown day. What the hell was that OPI call? I mean, come on. That is so soft. We should stop, taking away these beautiful plays. Garrett Wilson should have had a 2-touchdown game. He was great. He played really well. And in this matchup versus the Cowboys, this is the best matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. So, Garrett Wilson's got to be played. My wide receiver 6 this week. He should go off. All right, let's look at the Broncos at the Eagles. I understand that this is not a great matchup for the Bronco wide receivers. However, I am still going to tell you to play Courtland Sutton with a ton of confidence. Sutton has been so good this year. On Monday Night Football, he had 6 targets, dominated snaps and routes run amongst the wide receivers, obviously got into the end zone, 19.1 fantasy points, caught that touchdown right before half, which you love to see as a Bo Nix owner. I love to see it. You're going to start him even though it's a tough matchup. Now, Troy Franklin, 8 targets. That's very encouraging. If you're in a difficult position, you could put him out there. But again, there's no guarantee that he has a good fantasy day. On the opposite side of the ball, A.J. Brown. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I still want to start A.J. Brown. Okay? I know you're going to hate me for this. I know there's going to be comments saying, start A.J. Brown? What? But here's the deal. A.J. Brown has already gone to social media to complain. All right? That is the start of the A.J. Brown Pepper game. All right? Don't be surprised if A.J. Brown gets 11 targets this week. Now, I know he has a tough matchup versus Surtain. Okay? That's very true. But A.J. Brown last week, 8 targets. Okay? We're talking about a guy that's averaged 9 targets per game since week 2. So I would be much more concerned about Devonta Smith if I owned him. Obviously, there's concern about both of these guys. But with the amount of injuries that there is in week number 4, with the amount of buys there are in week number 4, I seriously can't imagine that 99% of you guys have a better name than A.J. Brown to put into your lineup. So obviously, there's going to be more boom bust than we wanted to. Jalen Hurts is scared to throw it downfield. He's a check down merchant, but you got to put A.J. Brown in your lineups. Devonta Smith, a flex play. Again, not a guy you're putting at wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, but you can put him in your flex and hope for a big game. I do think the Broncos are a good enough team to make this a close game, so that's good news for the wide receivers. Look, news is constantly changing in the NFL. For example, Jaylen Warren owners would know this best. Right before the game in Dublin last week, he was ruled inactive. Surprise inactive. Now, if you want to know my up-to-date latest rankings as soon as I hit submit on the site, then get the 2025 season pass with the promo code LAND. When you use my code LAND, it's a $34 one-time purchase. Again, you'll get my latest rest of season rankings, weekly rankings, all the premium tools on the Flock site, as well as some vouchers to come on our live stream and ask us questions. So check that out in the pinned comment if you want to support the show and get that kind of as like a secret weapon for your fantasy season. All right, let's move on to the start of the afternoon slate of games. We got the Titans at the Cardinals. Now, for the Titans, I want to make this very simple. There's no scenario I can think of where you're starting Calvin Ridley. Number 1, he's dealing with an injury. Number 2, in week number 4, he was 3rd on the team in snap share. Okay? 3rd amongst wide receivers in targets with 3. Even when he was dominating target share and snap share, he wasn't a good play for fantasy football. Cam Ward does not look like a good quarterback right now. And that shouldn't be a surprise for a rookie. But if you're going to start any of these names, I guess Alec A. Manor is a name that you could throw in there just simply because he has that chemistry with Cam Ward. And if there is going to be an injury to Calvin Ridley, maybe we see 6+ targets for Alec A. Manor. But again, you're really kind of throwing up a Hail Mary with Alec A. Manor if you're entertaining it. On the opposite side of the ball, I cannot tell you how happy I was for Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, a lot of people were making fun of him for catching the touchdown on Thursday Night Football, going to the ground, and he was emotional. But if you guys were under that much scrutiny, if you had that last name and you are underperforming and knew that you were underperforming, not living up to your own expectations, and then finally you felt like you broke out of that little slump that you were in, if you're not emotional, you're not human. I am so excited for Marvin Harrison Jr. So excited to see him get back into his groove. He had 10 targets on Monday Night Football. The first half was hell. And the second half, it was like the biggest swing of emotions for a player I've seen in years. From the first half, it's like, wow, he's a bust. His career's over. To the second half, it's like, wow, that's exactly who we thought the Cardinals were drafting out of Ohio State. So look, with all the injuries, if we had a healthy NFL, if we had no players on bye, he's probably more of a spot start. But because of necessity, of scarcity at the position, he is going to be a must start for me. The Titans are a top 6 matchup for your wide receivers, so he has a good chance to continue his form. Okay, the 10th matchup we're looking at here, the Bucks at the Seahawks. Now look, Emeka Egbuka is going into your lineup no matter what. I do not care that the Seahawks are the 3rd worst matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. I just don't care. Egbuka is that dude for this team, especially without Mike Evans. I mean, how do they not target Emeka Egbuka and Chris Godwin, hyper target them, each and every single week? Well, guess what? That's exactly what they did last week versus the Eagles. Both Egbuka and Chris Godwin got 10 targets. They also used Egbuka on the ground one time. Obviously, Egbuka has the big touchdown catch through the air. And, it didn't look great. That if you remove that one catch where he scored a touchdown, it didn't look great. But the Eagles secondary is legit. So, again, these are just feature weapons in this offense. I do think Chris Godwin is a flexible name. 10 targets in his first game back, a high percentage of the snaps, a high percentage of the routes run. All signs are pointing towards him having very good games in the future. So I definitely think he's a flex play in week number 5. On the opposite side of the ball, we're going to keep it simple, stupid. KISS, start Jackson Smith-Njigba. I know he had a bad Thursday Night Football. It wasn't his fault, but he's going to be back on top of the world, in my opinion. My wide receiver 3 in week number 5. There is not a roster I can think of where you would sit him. 44.5 point over under. The Seahawks are favored at home. Do not sit JSN. All right, let's look at the Lions at the Bengals here. One of the higher over-unders of the week at 49.5 points. Now, unfortunately, the Lions are also heavy favorites. One of the heaviest favorites of the week. Right now, that spread is at 8.5 points. That'll probably get bigger over the course of the week. Of course, you're going to start Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jameson Williams is a name that we need to talk about. So let me give you glass half full and glass half empty for Jameson Williams. As someone who owns Jameson Williams in the Flock League, by the way, okay? I'm speaking from experience. This is not just someone who, is not watching the games. I'm watching all these games, all the games, even the players I don't own. But here's the good news. The good news is Jameson Williams, same amount of targets as Amon-Ra St. Brown. In fact, he had 8 total touches, one more than Amon-Ra St. Brown this game. Okay? So the targets were there. The bad news is he and Jared Goff could not get on the same page at any point during this game. Now, some of that was on Jameson Williams. Some of that was on Jared Goff. After the game, Jared Goff actually took accountability. He felt like he could have set up Jameson Williams better with some of his throws. But here's the good news. Jameson Williams, shout out to Ian Hartitz on Twitter, had 195 unrealized yards in week 4. That is the 3rd highest single game mark since 2022. 3 games with under 50 yards to start the season. Not ideal. But again, like he said, the Lions are trying. And the best news for Jameson Williams is he gets to play against the Cincinnati Bengals in week number 5. This should be a get-right game for him. I would imagine this team, I mean, you can see it when you watch the Lions. They want everybody to do well. They want everybody to eat. I think they'll be intentional with Jameson Williams. I do think you can play him as a flex here in week number 5. You just have to hope that the Bengals keep it competitive enough, which might be asking a lot, honestly. Speaking of the Bengals, Jamar Chase, look, I get it if you're in a small league. If you're out there and you're in a 8-team league, a 10-team league, maybe you have a better option than Jamar Chase. But everybody else out there in 12 and 14-team leagues, it's not fun. Clearly, there's not the same upside as he had with Joe Burrow, but I think you need to start Jamar Chase. Now, I'm asking myself this week, okay, let's look at our rankings. Do we start Jamar Chase or Brian Thomas? Jamar Chase or Jalen Waddle? These are serious conversations that I'm having. However, he's still right in that top 24, almost a spot start, but stays in the top 24 as a must start. He had 7 targets on Thursday night. It wasn't great. Pat Surtain is the truth. There's no doubt about it. This offensive line cannot protect Jake Browning, even for him to have a chance to throw the ball. And that is a big problem. But again, I just doubt that you have someone off the waiver wire that you're going to start over Jamar Chase. You got to play him. At this point, Jamar Chase and Jameson Williams are not that different. They really are boom-bust guys. It's just Jameson has a lower target share and a better offense. As far as T. Higgins goes, he's a flexible name. They were intentional about targeting him early in this game. Obviously, he doesn't have a 40 bomb in him, but he has plenty of 20 bombs for the rest of the year. And the good news for both Chase and Higgins is during this game, the Lions are heavy favorites, and we're probably going to see the Bengals coming back from behind. I don't think the Lions defense is as scary as the Broncos defense, so there's plenty of good games left for the Broncos wide receivers, just lower expectations. All right, Commanders at Chargers, 47.5 point over under. The Chargers are favored by 3 points. Here's how I am projecting this game. I'm ranking this as if Terry McLaurin is ready to go. Debo's a top 15 play. Terry's a top 22 play. However, Tom Shad, who reports for the Commanders, when Dan Quinn was asked about Terry McLaurin, he basically only said they're trending in the right direction. Not a lot of information, right? I kind of lean towards Terry not playing this week. So if Terry is out, Debo's ranking doesn't change, but you just have more confidence because there will be more design plays and obviously targets for him if there's no Terry McLaurin. But again, with all the injuries happening right now, with all the uncertainties at wide receiver, if Terry's healthy, you can play him. And one of the big reasons is because Jaden Daniels is expected to play this week versus the Chargers. So that's a huge bump for the entire offense in Washington. On the opposite side of the ball, no, that is not a mistake in the graphics. Quentin Johnson is my wide receiver 10 in my rankings this week. I mean, what can you do? This guy is one of the most heavy targeted names. He's constantly getting over 10 targets, getting a bunch of yardage, high volume, high value opportunities down the field, in the end zone, in the red zone, the deep ball. Quentin Johnson's an incredible play. He's got to be in your lineups. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's true. He's got to be in your lineups. It's blowing my mind that I'm saying this. Good news, the Commanders are a top 8 matchup for your wide receiver. And Johnson's an absolute dog, man. A top 6 wide receiver in fantasy through the first 4 weeks. Maybe people weren't wrong on Quentin Johnson. Maybe they were early. Keenan Allen also a must start. Ladd McConkey has been demoted to a spot start. You can flex him if you want. But, I mean, these trends are not good for Ladd McConkey. You can see his first read target share has dropped each and every week from 28 to 25 to 22 to 21% over the last 4 weeks. So more and more often, Justin Herbert is not looking his way. That's not exactly what you want to see to put a bunch of confidence into Ladd McConkey this week. So he's a flex play at best, but right now Johnson's the guy for the Chargers. Okay, let's go to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Pats at the Bills, one of the highest over-unders of the week, but of course, the Bills are heavy favorites. Stephon Diggs, the good news is, Diggs, his role is starting to grow each and every week. He's getting a higher percentage of the snaps, which is what we love to see. He's also getting a higher percentage of the target share. Here in week number 4, he had his highest percentage of snaps and he had 7 targets. He turned those 7 targets into 6 catches for 101 yards, started to look a lot more productive. So if you're going to desperation play one of these names, it is Diggs right now. On the opposite side of the ball, there's not enough target share to go around for Shakir and Coleman to tell you to play them with confidence, but they are flex plays. Hopefully the Patriots can keep it a competitive game. Otherwise, you might be disappointed with these wide receivers. High over-under, so you can play them attached to Josh Allen, but each and every week, it could be a random tight end. It could be a backup running back. It could be the wide receiver 3 and Josh Palmer. It's just every week they're spreading the ball out in Buffalo, and that's hard to project from one week to the next. But Shakir is a safer play. Keon's probably the higher upside play. Okay, before we jump into Monday Night Football, here are 6 players that I have 100% confidence in for week 5. Jahmyr Gibbs versus the Bengals. Man, that is a nightmare for the Bengals. Nico Collins versus the Baltimore Ravens with no Marlon Humphrey. He should have a dominant game. Woody Marks against the Ravens. The Ravens are one of the best matchup for your running backs, and I'm riding the Woody Marks train. Scatterboo versus the Saints should dominate opportunities again. Garrett Wilson was robbed last week, but don't worry, he has the best matchup this week. And then Quentin Johnson, we're rocking in our DFS lineups as well. Look, this is my Quick 6 Super Slam FastDraft contest for week number 5. This is my entry. You can make your own entry. All you got to do is choose 6 non-quarterbacks to fill your lineup and adjust your boosters accordingly. If you haven't played yet, download the FastDraft app, use my promo code LAND. I'll match your deposit up to $50, and then you're going to get my week 5 rankings completely free. Okay, let's jump into the last matchup, which is the Chiefs at the Jaguars. Now, I got to eat some humble pie because I was pretty low on Xavier Worthy heading into last week. I did not anticipate them so aggressively integrating him into the game plan after he almost went out for the year with a shoulder injury. I did not anticipate that, okay? But we were wrong. We were totally wrong. Xavier Worthy comes in on Sunday, 8 targets, 2 carries. So they gave him 10 total touches, by far the most involved wide receiver of the team. It's not even close. He ran a huge amount of routes, was out there a high percentage of the snaps. Look, simply put, right now the Chiefs, their number one weapon is Xavier Worthy. So that's why you see him ranked as my wide receiver 12 this week. I cannot think of a reason to tell you not to start him. The Chiefs said they weren't going to slow roll him, and they didn't. He was super important to their game plan. That ended up being 17.1 fantasy points. He was great as a rushing threat out of the backfield with those trick plays and the end arounds. And he was also great through the air. So yeah, you got to play him. The Jags are a good team. This is going to be closer than people anticipate. So I imagine Xavier Worthy is going to be more needed this game, even than he was last game. If he had 10 touches last game, in a game where they dominated the Ravens, what could he do in this game that should be much, much closer? Now, on the opposite side of the ball, the only name that you're even like considering starting for the Jacksonville Jaguars is Brian Thomas. Okay, let's play good cop, bad cop. Bad cop, Brian Thomas is still not the player that you drafted in the first or second round. All right, let's just be honest. He's not that same player. However, good cop, he is recovering each and every week from that wrist injury. You're starting to see him play with more confidence. Last week versus the 49ers, Brian Thomas had 7 targets. Okay, so tied for first in amongst the team in targets. And he turned those 7 targets into over 10 fantasy points. Come on, Brian, finally. We are clapping for 10 fantasy points. That's pretty sad. But look, Brian Thomas at this point, a clear number 1 wide receiver in an offense. Week 5 with all these injuries, all these players on bye, I can't rationalize telling you to sit a player like that, which he could break out at any given week. He's still a monster. Think about what DK Metcalf did in Dublin last week. He took 1 single slant route to the house. Brian Thomas can do that on any given week. So I would be very hesitant to sit him. He's a flex play for me, but I am obviously very cautious with him moving forward. Guys, I appreciate you watching the video. Do me a favor, hit the like button and show some love. Subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. The running back start sit is already out on the channel, so make sure you go check that out. And nothing but love, guys. We'll see you next time. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app, use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.